Okay, you start off with your connection with the character of Franc.
Yeah. Franc was a character that I could relate to comfortably. I felt I clearly understood him. He he was a guy who was drawn to the drama and excitement and sensuality and sexuality of the milieu, but was not really. My sense of him was that he was not really a criminal naturally, not a natural criminal. And as a kid, I would always manage to avoid that last step of moving into some criminal behavior with the gang, and I would be the observer. So I could be around it, I could see it, I could understand it, but I wouldn't step over that line. And there are clues to that kind of behavior in Franc's character in the piece. He is drawn to it, but until the final gesture, until the final step, avoids burning himself in the flame. He just kind of touches it and draws back. He sort of manifests the symptoms, but doesn't really participate until he finally decides to at the very end, in a very sort of existential act. Interesting character. Franc identifies with both of them, sympathizes with both of them. When Green Eyes has his breakdown, Franc discovers something new about himself, but he still has an affection for Green Eyes. He has sympathy for him now. He has sympathy for him. And he has sympathy for Maurice too. When Maurice is lonely, suffering, cold, in pain, abandoned, Franc can identify with that as well and have sympathy for it because those are parts of himself. He sees that, he knows that he has those elements in himself and those experiences in himself. He reaches out to both of them in the same kind of way, with a gesture of compassion. But gradually, he's weaning himself of the need to be either of them. He finally becomes totally settled in being himself, and he finds himself in the process, in this very perverse, negative way, but he finds himself. He knows who he wants to be. He says, I don't have to try to undo my crime. I willed it. That's who I am. I know who I am. Yeah.
Is that in some way the essence of existentialism? Is that what that?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I don't claim to be a master of the philosophy of existentialism, but I would say so. Knowing, that kind of knowledge, self-knowledge, the kind of awareness of the moment, the condition, the time, the place. Self-examination of that kind.
I'm going to go backwards a little bit now into some history. I'm going to readjust this mic and always fine-tuning here. Let's go back and talk about the project. It was a project. Tell me how it came about. Tell me when Deathwatch as a play or Genet as a writer first came into your consciousness, and who the players were and how the project evolved. Basically the evolution of the film, as much as you want to or can recollect about that.
I was a student in an acting class with Jeff Corey, who was a fabulous teacher out here on the West Coast, acting teacher. Vic Morrow was in the class. He did an improvisation with a lady one night, which was terrifying and heart-stopping. The intensity of it was so powerful. And the conflict between he and the actress was unknown to us in the class. We could just see there was this terrifying energy created. And when it was over, and he was asked what it was about, he said, we had made a compact, each of us, she and I, that we would each perform a terrible act, a terrible criminal act. And I had done mine, and she was now reneging. And when asked what his crime was, he said he had chosen that his crime would be to kill a child. Very powerful imagination, powerful theatrical device. And I was struck. My God, where did this come from? And I had a conversation with him. He had just come from New York, where he had acted in the play of Deathwatch. And he was exploring these ideas as an actor that had come from Genet's writings. And he had brought out with him the West Coast rights to produce the play. He wanted to direct it. Subsequently, he hired me and Michael Forrest, who was also in our acting class, and Paul Mazursky, who Vic had known because they both had acted together in Blackboard Jungle. And that's how the play began on the West Coast. Genet had never been produced on the West Coast. Genet had only been talked about, heard about, underground scuttlebutt, hot stuff, sort of in the vein of what happened with Henry Miller when his works first started to appear. So there was a lot of interest. And when the play was produced, when we opened the show, it got a lot of attention in Los Angeles. Press, audience, fantastic reviews, and ticket-selling reviews. The LA Times critic in his review said something like, I was concerned that we might be raided at any moment. A play of this kind, with this kind of homosexuality, was on the cusp of being ahead of its time. It was a new kind of theatricality, a new kind of theater, and attracted a lot of attention. About a year after we did the play, I was at a party with Vic, and we were talking, and we both expressed an interest in doing the film. So I began to pursue the rights, the film rights. It took me a long time because I didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of mobility. Genet was in France, his agent was in England, indifferent to a couple of young guys in Hollywood who wanted to make a movie. So it was a tough process, but after about a year, I prevailed, got the film rights. Vic and I formed a partnership and put together a few bucks, made a movie. Yeah. The screenplay was done by Vic and his wife, Barbara Turner, very talented lady, the mother of Jennifer Jason Leigh. Took quite a while because Vic was working on Combat, the television series. He was busy, preoccupied. But they finally turned out the screenplay. The early part of the film was totally created, fabricated. The scenes in the prison yard and so forth. I had a relationship with some people who were doing drug therapy at the Nevada State Penitentiary. And they helped me get to the warden there. I went and had a meeting with him and got from him the access to the prison yard and some interiors and the use of some prisoners, volunteer prisoners, to work as extras in the film, to create the execution sequence. Pretty amazing sequence in the movie. And a frightening sequence for me. The early money came from a friend of mine, a lady named Chase Mishkin, who heard me talking about the project one day and said, I'll give you some money to help you get started. It was a magnificent sum of $12,000 that put us on the map. Once we had the $12,000 in the bank, we began to build on that. We did the picture on a budget of about $65,000. And only about 35 or 40 of it was in cash. The rest was in deferred salaries. Film was shot by Vilas Lapiniaks, who was a very talented, emerging cinematographer. Bob Ellenstein, who played the guard, was a longtime friend of mine, and I admired his work. I brought him to Vic, and Vic liked the idea, hired him to play the guard. And we spent one weekend at the Nevada State Penitentiary, Saturday and Sunday. Flew up on a Friday night and flew back on Sunday night. Chartered an old DC-3 to take everybody up. Paid $1,000 for the plane trip for everybody. Put everything on the plane, all the equipment, all the people. Rented a small, very small studio in Hollywood, and had the set built, very simple, four-wall wood flats, a couple of corridors, and a larger room. We shot it during Vic's hiatus from combat. He had a few weeks off, and it was thrilling. It was very thrilling filmmaking. It was kind of guerrilla warfare getting this thing done. But we were committed to the ideas of the film and the power of it, the power of the material. And we were highly motivated because we knew that we had had great audience reaction, and press reaction when we'd done the play. We wanted to commemorate that. We wanted to make a permanent record of it. And the first screening of it, first public screening of any note, was in Los Angeles at one of the studios. A gentleman came up to us after it was over and said, "I'm connected with the San Francisco Film Festival, and I'd like you to show the film there." We were elated. We thought, wow, that's exciting. We're going to a festival. The night of the first screening in San Francisco, Vic and I drove up to North Beach where the theater was. And I swear we saw a very long line of people winding around a block. Had no idea why they were there. And then discovered they were there to see Deathwatch. So we had this amazing experience. Film had a very, very limited audience, but very intense audience. And we got it done. That's pretty much all I can say about it. We got it done. It was not easy.
You guys were at the very, very cutting edge of independent filmmaking,
Yeah.
you know, which is now kind of almost a category unto itself.
Yeah.
But you had no models to follow, really, did you? I mean,
We had a model, and we went and spoke to him. The model was John Cassavetes. We met with him, told him what we had in mind, got some advice from him. He wrote a few letters for us to people who might be helpful. None of it was bore much fruit, but it was good to have that kind of camaraderie with him. He had made Shadows and I think maybe one other film, and he was on his way as a filmmaker. But he was the model, and in fact, I heard him talking about how his first film evolved, and it evolved out of an acting class as well. There was an exercise done in acting class where there was this kind of relationship, a racial relationship, interracial relationship. And again, he was talking to some people about it on internet, or I think he said that he was talking on radio about it, and said that he wanted to make a film, and some people sent in some money. And he said once a few bucks came in, he was sort of committed. He was stuck, and he had to make the movie of Shadows, his first and wonderful film. So we were somewhat following in his footsteps.
that's very interesting.
Yeah. Never did meet Genet. Never did meet Genet. Only did business with his agent. And when the contract finally came back with his signature on it, we were just so elated. Jean Genet had signed a contract, you know. We could now make a movie of his play, Deathwatch.
The shot of his face with a thing and his head going into it, and you already have a little bit of a personal relationship with this man because you see his anger, you see him walking in that thing, you see him urinating in his pants. I mean, And then it culminates in that.
I have nightmares about that shot. The actor was Gavin MacLeod, who later was the captain on the Love Boat. Brave soul. Stuck his head in that lock. Vic wanted that shot. Camera below Gavin's face, seeing Gavin's face in the foreground and the blade coming down. There was no trick to it. The mechanics of it was that there were some 2x4s erected on the sides of the track of the blade, so the blade was stopped by these 2x4s. It was stopped about that far from Gavin's neck. The blade was wood, but it was a sharp edge piece of plywood, and definitely would have taken Gavin's head off if it had come down. It came down very heavy, very hard, and very fast. We tested it several times. Tested it, bang, it stopped. Tested it, bang, it stopped. But it was made of wood and bolts. Wood and screws and bolts. And there was no way of knowing if you were testing it too much and weakening it in the process. Maybe the next time the bolts won't hold. Maybe they'll crack. Maybe something will go wrong. And we will have killed an actor. I have nightmares about it to this day. But Gavin was willing to do it. And Vic was daring. And I was terrified. I felt like Franc watching this madman director doing this crazy thing. And I'm a party to it. I'm not doing it, but I'm a party to it somehow. And Gavin put his head in there. Camera was underneath him. Camera rolled. And the guy swings and chops that rope that holds it. And then we dissolved or slowed down the film at that point and dissolved out of it into the rose just before it hits the stop point. So you don't see it actually come to a stop. But it's a terrifying moment. And we had, watching this scene, 100 hardcore prisoners who were incarcerated in the Nevada State Penitentiary. And they had volunteered. They had nothing else to do. Being a movie, yeah, you know. So they were out there on the ground, kneeling on the ground in ranks, watching this. And we caught some of the looks on their faces. It really rang a bell with these guys. I don't think that there were any death row inmates there. But there were some hardcore guys there, very hardcore guys. And I learned, being amongst them, because we did have to work amongst them at times, I learned that Genet was right on the mark in terms of their social structure, their social sense. I got into a conversation with one of them one day, and typically you would either ask, what are you in for, or they want to tell you what they're in for. And sometimes they will tell you they're innocent, and sometimes they will romanticize their own crime, make it more meaningful than it is. But they certainly romanticize other people's crimes, or tell you they are romantic about other people's crimes. Pointed out a particular convict to me and said, "You see the guy over there, the guy with the bald head?" Yeah, burned a bull. He did what? Burned a bull. What does that mean? Killed a cop. I also heard a true story in the yard about a guy who had been in this penitentiary, had done his time, and had been paroled out and was living in Reno. He'd been out on the street for just a matter of a very few weeks, when one day he walked into a pawn shop, bought a gun, called the police, and said, "There's a man standing on the corner of such and such street holding a gun in his hand." And it was him. He stepped outside and waited for the police to come and pick him up because he felt at home in the prison and totally lost outside and wanted to go back to jail, wanted to go back to his world. It's a Genet story. Yeah. The play, the writing is remarkable. I still find it remarkable to this day. Quite remarkable. And the film, having the subject matter that it did, and containing a fairly explicit scene of homosexual sex and sexuality in it, was very cutting edge. It was at a time when the British had just recently passed a law that that negated the illegality of sexual acts between consenting adults in privacy. If they were consenting adults doing whatever the act was in the privacy of their home, these acts were no longer considered criminal or illegal behavior. Not so in the United States. Many sexual acts were still on the books, even in the privacy of your home, as a criminal act. So we were very cutting edge. The film was very cutting edge in terms of what we were portraying on the screen.
Risky.
Yeah.
In fact.
Yeah.
I mean, like you say, you were afraid of being raided when you were doing the
Yeah.
theatrical version. I mean, that was the period of Lenny Bruce. And,
That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, the first production of the play that we did was in a coffee house. It was in a local coffee house in Los Angeles. What were then the popular coffee houses where comics like Lenny Bruce were performing and where folk singers were performing. And we rented the theater for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Before us, there was a folk singer. After us, there was a folk singer. When our audience cleared out, a whole other audience came in to hear folk music.
Nice.
Gerald Fried is a very lovely, very sparse score. It had classic overtones to it. We might have gone in a different direction. You could have had a jazz score to this movie. But we felt the ideas were classic rather than wanting to say edgy, contemporary, hip. Didn't want it to be a hip movie. I felt strongly, and I think Vic agreed, that the film should have a historic sense about it, a shelf life sense to it that should last through various times and not be appropriate only for a particular period of time. I still hear that melody that Fried wrote. Da 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 da. Had a very strong melody line to it. Very good. Very good.
I'd like you to talk about Paul Mazursky's depiction of Maurice and about Michael Forrest's, from that kind of an acting standpoint, from a little more technical perspective.
We were all of the actors, and of course Vic as the director, working from a similar kind of craft, a similar approach to the work. And the period in which we were making this work was a period when the method was in the air. It was all about method. It was all about building a character and living it, living the experience, preparing by finding elements in yourself that you could relate to for the character, and working from a very personal position in the relationship with the other actors. When we did the play, for example, our performances would start in the dressing room from the moment we arrived at the theater. Without discussing it, without being consciously dealing with it, we would be in character and with each other. Don't take my makeup. Get the hell away from here. Bring your own goddamn pencil. Punk. Did you see what he did? I know he's got the money. He can afford to buy a goddamn pencil of his own. Why the fuck is he using mine? Will you do something about it? Because I'll beat the shit out of him. Makes me so fucking mad. That kind of stuff would be going on in the dressing room. And you would, it's perverse. You would recognize it, that something had overtaken you, and you would welcome it because you knew that it was useful, and it was going to be useful when you stepped on stage. That chemistry, that energy would already be exuding. I think the audiences felt it. I think it penetrated. And we were physically, when we were doing the play, very close. I mean, the audience was within you could reach out your arm and touch the audience. So it was a very claustrophobic environment. And the film has that same feeling, I think. I have great respect for all of them, for Mike, for Paul. We're good friends to this day. And poor Vic is gone. Terrible helicopter production accident. He was killed in a filming accident. But he was the touch point for this kind of intensity. He was an extremely dedicated, intense actor. And we all wanted to deliver for him, to bring that kind of depth of commitment to the work.